At a charity event in a school, a girl with silver blonde hair sings an old lullaby the CEO's late mother used to sing. Her voice and face shake him. He leans forward, breathless. Could she be family? Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. There was a restless hush in the aging auditorium of Maplewood Middle School, where the annual talent show drew parents, teachers, and the odd dignitary who found themselves on the school board. Marcus Sullivan, a renowned CEO known for his unshakable poise in corporate boardrooms, sat stiffly in the front row. He had come as a favor to an old mentor, never expecting anything beyond a mundane parade of recitals and awkward comedy sketches. For years, he had prided himself on controlling every aspect of his life: business expansions, philanthropic projects, even the distance between himself and his own emotions. Yet, as a faint spotlight illuminated a lone microphone on the stage, an unsettling ripple of anticipation threaded through him, hinting that his calculated world might soon face an unexpected tremor. He shifted in his seat, remembering how his mother, Eleanor Sullivan, had once stood on a similar stage, performing at community events in a tattered evening gown. She had been radiant, her gentle soprano voice capturing hearts, even when poverty and worry lined her eyes. Marcus seldom allowed thoughts of her to linger. She had passed away before he could fully repay her devotion. In countless interviews, he labeled himself a self-made man, neatly bypassing the memory of her sacrifices. Now the squeak of microphone feedback jolted him from his reverie, and a girl of about 12 stepped into the circle of light. She wore a simple floral dress, her shoulders tense as she clutched the microphone. Marcus leaned forward, an inexplicable twinge of curiosity stirring in his chest. He waited. The piano accompaniment began tentatively, and the girl inhaled as though summoning courage from the rafters. Her voice emerged soft at first, growing steadier with every note. Marcus recognized the tune within seconds. It was his mother's favorite song, Falling Petals, a melody that once filled their cramped apartment on nights when the future looked hopeless. A swirl of memories threatened to unmoor him. Eleanor cooking dinner with the radio humming in the corner, her face lighting up whenever that gentle refrain echoed through static. His pulse beat uncomfortably fast as he watched the girl navigate the intricate phrases. Each chord unlocked a memory he had barricaded behind success and ambition. He felt the weight of his mother's absence press down on him, sharper than it had in years. Suddenly, when the final note faded, the auditorium erupted in applause that startled Marcus out of his reverie. The girl on stage, her name was announced as Hannah Reid, offered a timid bow. Marcus found his hands trembling against his tailored trousers, a phenomenon he'd usually ascribed to exhaustion or stress. But tonight it felt undeniably like emotion. He managed to stand, clapping more forcefully than he intended, vaguely aware of sympathetic glances from people seated nearby. As Hannah disappeared behind the curtain, he felt an urgent need to speak with her, to unravel why she had chosen that specific song. Striding toward the side of the stage, he convinced a teacher to let him backstage, offering little explanation beyond a quiet mention that the performance had meant a great deal to him. Backstage chaos surrounded him, children in sequined costumes chattering excitedly, stagehands darting around with props, and the lingering aroma of hairspray. Yet all he noticed was Hannah, huddled near a prop table with her sheet music clutched in one hand. She glanced up, startled, as he approached. Nervously, she thanked him when he praised her voice, but her eyes clouded with confusion at his intensity. Marcus mentioned that Falling Petals had been his mother's cherished lullaby, and Hannah blinked in surprise. She revealed that she had discovered the tune in an old songbook her grandmother kept, claiming it helped her stay connected to a family legacy. Something in her tone hinted at a sadness bigger than her years. Marcus recognized that ache of loss, knowing its shape all too well. Before he could ask more, a teacher whisked Hannah away for her next cue. Marcus stood rooted in place, unsettled by the unexpected rush of empathy he felt. On his way out, he overheard a snippet of conversation between Hannah and a volunteer who asked if her parents had come to watch. Hannah answered with a shrug, mumbling that her grandmother was too ill to attend. There was no mention of a father or mother. Marcus clenched his jaw, recalling how he, too, had often performed in cramped halls without a father's face in the audience. Later that night, after a restless drive home, he found himself humming Falling Petals under his breath, wrestling with an urge to see Hannah sing again and delve into the story behind her solitude. Over the following days, Marcus tried to bury himself in business obligations, yet the memory of Hannah's performance intruded on every negotiation. He reached out to the school principal, only to discover that Hannah's grandmother had withdrawn her from the after-school choir program, citing medical constraints at home. Something about that phone call rattled him. Why would her only guardian remove her from the one place she seemed to shine? Late one evening, while flipping through financial reports, Marcus paused at a photograph pinned to his office wall. It showed his mother holding a microphone in a ragged theater years ago, smiling despite her hardships. The parallel haunted him. Determined, he made inquiries through his philanthropic foundation, seeking a reason to contact Hannah without seeming intrusive or exploitative. He persisted. Eventually, a soft-spoken school counselor informed him that Hannah had been juggling medical appointments for her grandmother, leaving little time for extracurriculars. This struck a chord in Marcus, recalling how his mother had once balanced multiple jobs. He arranged a discreet meeting, presenting it as a proposal for a youth music scholarship. That was how he found himself standing on the porch of a small bungalow, listening to the echo of a doorbell. Hannah answered, clearly startled to see him. Her wary eyes reflected equal parts surprise and hope. He mentioned the scholarship idea, framing it as a chance for her to nurture her musical gifts. For a moment, her guarded expression cracked, and Marcus glimpsed a flicker of longing. Then she shook her head, apologizing that she couldn't accept. Behind her, a frail voice called out, and Hannah's grandmother appeared in a worn robe, leaning on a walker. The older woman's sharp eyes recognized Marcus's expensive attire. Politely but firmly, she explained that Hannah was needed at home and that they had no time for fancy programs. Marcus heard the pride and desperation stitched into every syllable. He offered to drive them to medical appointments or cover tutoring expenses, only to be met with a resolute shake of the head. Hannah stood to the side, silent, as though torn between hope and duty. Marcus sensed the door closing on him, literally and figuratively, until the grandmother gave a quiet sigh and said Hannah could sing for him one more time. That way, he'd have no illusions about her situation. In the dimly lit living room that smelled faintly of antiseptic, Hannah stood beside a battered piano. She began to sing Falling Petals again. Her voice trembled, not with stage fright, but with the burden of responsibilities no child should shoulder. Marcus felt his throat tighten as the grandmother closed her eyes, fighting back tears. The final note resonated with a quiet, poignant resolve, like a delicate promise that defied their meager circumstances. As silence settled, Hannah looked at Marcus with an expression that seemed to ask whether he now understood the walls she was forced to build. He gently nodded, moved beyond words. Somewhere deep inside, he knew he couldn't walk away. The path ahead would be complicated, but he saw in that moment his mother's legacy carried forward. In the days that followed her impromptu recital in that modest living room, Hannah's voice lingered in Marcus Sullivan's mind like a delicate chord that refused to fade. He would find himself humming Falling Petals without realizing it, only to pause in embarrassment when his colleagues cast curious glances. For a man who had spent years perfecting his emotional armor, these involuntary moments felt disconcerting. Yet there was no denying the soft ache that spread through him whenever he remembered how that tired bungalow and its battered piano had set the stage for a girl whose potential he could not ignore. The intensity of Hannah's singing, coupled with the quiet resolve in her grandmother's eyes, reminded him of all the shattered pieces his mother had once managed to piece together. At night, he stared at the city lights from his penthouse, envisioning that living room where hope and hardship coexisted, each note a plea for an uncertain future. He had given them his business card, scrawling a personal number on the back. Neither Hannah nor her grandmother had seemed eager to use it. They accepted it out of politeness, tucking it onto a kitchen counter, piled with medical bills and old newspapers. Marcus understood their reluctance, aware that his polished presence and talk of scholarships could come across as uncomfortably grandiose in their world. But he had learned through experience that genuine kindness was sometimes best received in small gestures, not grand declarations. Conflicted, he sought ways to help from a distance. He discreetly arranged for groceries to be delivered, instructing the service to label them as a routine donation from the local food bank. He also reached out to a friend who worked at a nearby clinic, quietly covering any outstanding costs for Hannah's grandmother. The sense of secrecy gnawed at him because he had never been in the habit of hiding his philanthropy. Yet for the first time it felt crucial to respect someone else's boundaries more than to indulge his own eagerness to fix everything. In the midst of those cautious overtures, his professional life pressed on relentlessly, as it always did. Mergers and acquisitions, shareholder meetings, and expansions into new markets all demanded attention. Even so, the hollow routine of endless flights and stiff boardrooms took on a new dimension. He realized that the sincerity Hannah displayed on stage, a vulnerability and rawness he hadn't witnessed in years, rekindled something he had buried since losing his mother. Once he had been fueled by a dream to provide for the woman who had sacrificed everything for his future. Her death had left him floundering, unsure of how to direct that ambition. Now, whenever he closed a deal or signed a crucial contract, he wondered if the wealth he accumulated could be harnessed to make a real difference for someone like Hannah. It was a persistent echo in his mind, refusing to be silenced by the usual logic he relied on to shape his world. One drizzly afternoon, a summons arrived in the form of a trembling voicemail from the school principal. Hannah's grandmother had collapsed at home, prompting a wave of panic among the staff who worried about her well-being. Since no immediate family could be reached, the grandmother had been transported to a public hospital, leaving Hannah alone until neighbors found her. Marcus listened to the message, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. The principal asked if Marcus could help, given that he was the closest contact willing to take responsibility. He found himself pressing redial before the recording even finished, offering to pick Hannah up and ensure she was safe. It was an impulsive decision, but there was no time to second guess. A half hour later, he was guiding his sports sedan along narrow streets, determined to reach Maplewood Middle School before Hannah sensed she was entirely alone in the world. He spotted her outside the school's main entrance, clutching an old backpack and scanning each passing vehicle with eyes red from crying. The instant she recognized his face through the windshield, relief and confusion mingled across her features. Marcus parked, hurrying to her side. Without any preamble, he asked if she was all right, and Hannah gave a shaky shrug. She wasn't used to hugging near strangers, but something in her posture told him she was moments away from collapsing. Instead of words, he offered a gentle hand on her shoulder, guiding her into the car. The usual hush that accompanied his presence persisted. She was too anxious to speak, and he was too unsettled to press. They drove in near silence until he managed a quiet question about the hospital's location. When they arrived, the waiting area smelled of antiseptic and fear. A nurse recognized Hannah from prior visits with her grandmother, handing them a clipboard. Marcus filled out the forms, ignoring the quizzical looks from staff who wondered how this polished businessman connected to a frightened young girl. An hour passed, then another. Hannah dozed off in the plastic chair, exhaustion overwhelming her. Marcus perched beside her, his arm draped around the back of her seat to keep her steady. He thought about how sterile and unfeeling hospitals could be. In a sudden visceral memory, he recalled pacing similar corridors after his mother's health had deteriorated. Perhaps that was why, despite their tenuous connection, he felt an overwhelming urge to shield Hannah from the chaotic uncertainty swirling around them. Eventually, a weary doctor approached, motioning for Marcus to follow. He explained that Hannah's grandmother needed surgery for a heart condition that had worsened over time, most likely accelerated by stress and poor living conditions. The medical team would do all they could, but a lengthy hospital stay loomed, along with steep expenses. Marcus nodded, quietly offering to handle whatever costs insurance did not cover. The doctor hesitated for only a second before scribbling some notes, as if deciding not to question the generosity. When Marcus returned to the waiting area, he found Hannah awake, eyes wide with fear. He kneeled down, speaking softly so as not to startle her. He told her that her grandmother would need time to heal and assured her that he would cover the bills. She looked at him as though he were some improbable figure, part savior, part intruder, offering help she had never dared to request. The hospital made arrangements for her grandmother's care, but Hannah had nowhere else to go. Marcus stepped in without hesitation, signing temporary guardianship papers before leading her to his car. She said little, eyes rimmed with worry, clutching a small bag that held her grandmother's photograph album and the beloved music book. Once they reached his gleaming penthouse, Hannah stared at the polished floors and enormous windows. She looked uncertain, as though waiting for reality to pull her back into hardship. Marcus simply watched. Next, please subscribe, like, and share. Marcus's penthouse was a study in quiet opulence, every corner meticulously curated to reflect a man who valued both elegance and efficiency. The marble floors gleamed under discreet lighting, and a wall of glass revealed the sprawling lights of downtown. Hannah stood in the foyer, clutching the canvas bag that contained her grandmother's photograph album and wrinkled music sheets. She hovered near the threshold, wary of stepping further into a space that felt like a museum to someone unaccustomed to luxury. Marcus, his tie loosened and his jacket draped over one arm, watched her with a mixture of concern and guilt. He recalled his own early days in a cramped, dilapidated apartment, longing for resources he could never quite grasp. For Hannah, all of this probably felt too large, too foreign, a place that could never be hers. He set a calming hand on her shoulder. "It's all right," he said, voice low so it wouldn't echo. "You'll stay here until your grandmother's better. It's just temporary." Hannah nodded, but her eyes remained wide, tracking the contours of the open living area. A moment later, his housekeeper, Vera, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s, appeared. She regarded Hannah with immediate kindness, offering a warm smile. Marcus was relieved to see Vera's gentle expression, because he had not been sure how to greet a frightened child in his own home. This was new territory for him, and he needed all the help he could get. "Hi, sweetheart," Vera said. "I've made up a guest room for you. It's nothing fancy, but you'll be comfortable." Hannah managed a small smile, though her grip on the canvas bag tightened. Marcus mouthed a silent thank you to Vera, who nodded and motioned for Hannah to follow her down the hall. When their footsteps receded, Marcus took a moment to breathe. It astonished him how quickly life could change. One day he was attending a simple talent show out of obligation, and now he was responsible for an anxious child whose grandmother lay in a hospital bed uncertain of her future. He was at least reassured that money could smooth certain bureaucratic hurdles. He had already requested daily updates from the medical team, who promised to notify him at once if there was any change in the grandmother's condition. Later that evening, after a subdued dinner that Hannah had barely touched, Marcus found her in the guest room, sitting cross-legged on the bed. She was thumbing through the old photograph album, her expression distant. He gently knocked on the door frame, observing the small sprawl of sheet music and the keepsakes that linked her to a life far removed from these glossy walls. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. She looked up and nodded. The overhead light was dim, casting shadows that flickered across framed art and fresh linens. He took a seat on a small cushioned chair in the corner, conscious of how imposing he might seem. "I know this must all feel strange," he began, each word carefully measured. "I remember when I first moved to the city, everything felt too fast, too expensive, too big. I can't imagine what it's like for you, being here under these circumstances." Hannah shrugged, her voice subdued. "It's nice, though," she admitted. Then, after a moment's hesitation, "Thank you for, letting me stay." Marcus's chest tightened, touched by her small display of gratitude. "I've been thinking about a plan," he said. "Your grandmother's doctors told me the recovery might take a while, but they expect her to pull through. In the meantime, I'll make sure you get to school, keep up with your routine, whatever you need." She nodded again, still holding that battered album. Marcus wondered if he was doing too much, or perhaps not enough. Her eyes flickered to her music sheets, and he guessed she was searching for something familiar to ground her. "Would you like to practice singing, or maybe go to the school's music room after hours?" he offered, recalling how her talent on stage had shone through the gloom of that old auditorium. "Music room?" she echoed with a wistful glint. "I used to stay after school for chorus, but I had to stop." Marcus felt her reluctance. "You'll have time now," he said. "We'll talk to your teachers, arrange lessons if you want. You shouldn't lose something that brings you joy." She gave a delicate shrug, expression torn between hope and doubt. In that fleeting moment, he saw the same determination that had once fueled him. Children growing up with meager means often learn to bury their dreams in practicality. He wanted to change that for her. Days passed, and Hannah settled into the routine of the penthouse with caution. She rose early for school, where a driver discreetly dropped her off. In the afternoons, she completed homework in the spacious living room, often with Vera's help. Marcus noticed she ate her meals in small bites and watched him warily whenever he tried to discuss anything related to her grandmother's hospital stay. Sometimes, at odd intervals, he would catch a strain of humming from the guest room, a gentle tune from that old music book. He tried not to pry, but he made a point of asking about her day, even if her answers were clipped or vague. It became their unspoken ritual each evening. She would arrive home, recite a line or two about her classes, then retreat to her room. In truth, Marcus had never felt such empathy for anyone else's struggles, yet he was also acutely aware that Hannah's acceptance of his help might be tenuous. One afternoon, his phone vibrated with a hospital update. The surgery had gone well enough, but complications threatened his patient's fragile heart. Hannah's grandmother would need more procedures, more time, and there was no definite discharge date in sight. Marcus quietly relayed the information to Hannah, bracing for her reaction. She simply blinked, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. "Can I see her this weekend?" she asked, voice trembling. "I need to talk to her. I have to make sure she's not scared." Marcus nodded. "We'll go whenever you want." Early Saturday morning, they navigated the hospital's corridors together. Marcus kept a small distance behind her, guessing that Hannah might want to greet her grandmother alone. Through the window of the hospital room, he saw the elderly woman looking frailer than he remembered, with tubes snaking around the bed. Hannah approached cautiously, her shoulders stiff. At first, her grandmother's voice came out weak, but her eyes brightened upon seeing Hannah, relief and fear coexisting. Marcus remained near the doorway, unwilling to intrude. From where he stood, he overheard fragments of Hannah's whispered reassurances, talk about school, how she was managing all right, and how the big penthouse was intimidating, but not bad. Her grandmother reached for Hannah's hand, murmuring repeated thanks to Marcus that he pretended not to hear. Guilt twisted inside him because, in truth, he couldn't simply patch their lives with money. He knew something deeper was required. Consistency, maybe, or an emotional investment he had never freely given to anyone else. Later, when they left the hospital, Hannah seemed quieter than before. He wondered if reality had sunk in, that her grandmother's recovery might be long and draining. As they drove back to the penthouse, she gazed out the window, watching passers-by and streetlights blur into a swirl of movement. That night, as the city glowed beneath them, Marcus invited Hannah to join him at the piano he'd recently had delivered. She wandered over, eyes widening in surprise. It was a sleek, upright model, smaller than the grand pianos in luxury showrooms, but perfectly suited to the apartment's layout. The black polish gleamed under overhead lighting, a blank canvas waiting for her voice. "I remember you said you stopped chorus," he began gently. "This piano is yours to use whenever you like." For an instant she looked at him as though he were handing her a priceless gem. "You got this, for me?" He shrugged, feeling oddly self-conscious. "I thought you might want to practice. If not, that's okay too." Tentatively, Hannah seated herself on the piano bench, running her fingertips over the keys. She struck a hesitant chord, then another. The sound reverberated in the open living space. Marcus stepped back, letting her explore. Softly she tried a melody from memory, stumbling on a few notes until she found the correct sequence. Then, to his amazement, she started to sing. Her voice was timid, but gradually it filled the room, each line coaxing out the resonance that had electrified the stage at the talent show. The tension in her posture eased as she found her rhythm, and Marcus stood there in silent admiration. For a fleeting minute, all the hospital fears, the financial strain, and the awkwardness of this living arrangement disappeared, replaced by a raw outpouring of vulnerability. When the final chord died, Hannah lowered her hands. "I'm not as good without practice," she mumbled, avoiding his gaze. He broke into a gentle smile. "It was beautiful," he said, meaning every syllable. Before going to next, please subscribe, like, and share. Hannah's soft singing at the new piano soon became a nightly backdrop for the hush of Marcus's penthouse. Despite the challenges in her life, her grandmother's uncertain condition, her own disrupted routine, she seemed to glean solace from the instrument and the songs scribbled into her old music book. Marcus, who had once shunned personal attachments, discovered himself lingering in the hallway whenever she practiced. He would pretend to head for the kitchen, but in truth, he was compelled to pause, mesmerized by the fragile determination behind each note. There was something hopeful in that melody, a reminder that beauty could persist in the face of hardship. It also forced him to remember his mother's voice. He wondered whether, if given the chance, someone like Hannah might have encouraged Eleanor Sullivan to believe that one day her son would repay her sacrifices. One evening, after Hannah's final chord drifted into silence, Marcus ventured into the living room where she was poring over a piece of sheet music. He handed her a cup of herbal tea, recalling how his mother used to soothe her vocal cords with a similar brew. She flashed him a nervous smile before sipping gingerly. The city lights framed them both, the window acting like a portrait of two souls unexpectedly intertwined. They made polite small talk, how she found her new teachers, whether the hospital staff had given any fresh updates, and if she needed anything for school. Bit by bit, she shed her defensive shell. She asked him about his mother, and he found himself hesitating. He rarely spoke about Eleanor in detail, having buried those memories beneath layer upon layer of professional triumphs. But something in Hannah's earnest gaze nudged him to share. "My mother had an incredible voice," Marcus began, settling onto the sofa's edge. "No formal training, just raw talent that shone whenever she sang. She balanced 2 jobs, but found time to perform at church recitals or small community events. I think she always hoped I'd inherit her love for music, but I was too busy memorizing facts and figures." He paused, recalling the cramped apartment that smelled of thrift store fabric and homemade meals. Hannah listened quietly, her head tilting with empathy. "She must have been proud of you," Hannah ventured. Marcus tried to laugh, but it emerged as more of a sigh. "I hope so," he said, staring into the dark liquid of his own tea. "She passed away just before I could show her I'd made something of myself. That's the hardest part, knowing she never got to enjoy what came next." They fell into a momentary silence, each lost in private recollections. Outside, the constant hum of traffic underscored the sense that life kept moving, heedless of personal grief. Hannah broke the hush by tapping the sheet music. "Your mom's favorite song. Do you remember all the words?" she asked softly. Marcus nodded. "I do," he said, voice catching unexpectedly. A brief hush settled again, and though neither spoke, an unspoken promise bridged the distance between them. Perhaps one day soon they would play it together at this piano, merging the echoes of his mother's memory with the young girl's irrepressible spirit. In the meantime, practical matters demanded attention. The hospital bills mounted, and he had the best specialists check on Hannah's grandmother. Each new consultation carried worry for Hannah, who dreaded hearing that her grandmother might not recover fully. Marcus tried not to let that dread weigh her down further. As winter settled over the city, Hannah's daily routine transformed in small but vital ways. Vera coaxed her into heartier breakfasts, ensuring the girl left for school with something warm in her stomach. After classes, Hannah occasionally stopped by the nurse's office to inquire about volunteering, wanting to pay forward the kindness she had received. At home, she studied at the kitchen island instead of retreating to her room, and Marcus took pride in explaining the trickier bits of geometry or grammar when she allowed his help. At first, her questions were halting, as though expecting him to shrug her off. But when he carefully walked her through each problem, she would relax and scribble solutions on her notebook. This shift in their dynamic lifted a weight from his chest. He realized he wasn't just writing checks or opening his door. He was becoming a genuine presence. Despite the emotional progress, challenges persisted. On a gloomy Thursday, Marcus received a midday phone call from the hospital. Complications had arisen, and doctors advised a more aggressive surgical approach for Hannah's grandmother. The moment the conversation ended, he felt the sting of helplessness swirl inside. It was reminiscent of how powerless he had felt in his mother's final days, when no amount of success or wealth could erase the unstoppable march of illness. He forced his mind to clear, refusing to spiral into old regrets. Hannah needed stability, not a caretaker weighed down by guilt. Calling the school, he arranged to pick her up early, preferring that she hear the news from him rather than from a social worker or a phone call. When he arrived, she walked to the car with a muted expression, as though bracing herself. He carefully explained the situation, urging her not to lose hope. The doctors offered a path forward, albeit a risky one. If the procedure succeeded, Hannah's grandmother might regain enough strength to resume a limited but meaningful life. However, any misstep could prove devastating. Over dinner, Hannah stared at her plate, pushing morsels of food in slow circles. Marcus attempted reassurance, though he sensed she was reliving every anxious hour she'd already spent in hospital halls. "She's strong," Marcus murmured, resting a hand gently on her forearm. "And you'll still have me no matter what."
He hadn't planned to phrase it that way, but once the words slipped out, he realized he meant them. She peered up, eyes searching. It struck him that no other adult had offered unconditional support before. Her grandmother had tried her best, but they had been trapped by hardship, always stumbling from one crisis to another. Marcus represented a stability that felt almost unreal to her. They visited the hospital again that weekend, finding her grandmother pale but determined.
Wires and IV lines cluttered the space around the bed, yet she mustered a thin smile for Hannah, asking about classes and if the penthouse was too fancy. Hannah managed a small laugh, admitting everything was bigger than she expected. Then her grandmother's gaze fell upon Marcus, brimming with gratitude and lingering concern. She whispered thanks, voice trembling. Marcus gently asked that she focus on healing. He explained that Hannah would remain safe with him for as long as necessary, though he never specified exactly how. In truth, he wasn't sure. Courts and formal guardianship loomed in the background, yet none of it mattered if her grandmother pulled through. In the corridor afterward, Hannah clung to his arm, trying to hide how shaken she was by the tubes and the frailty of the woman who had raised her. As they returned home, Marcus realized a new sense of resolve had taken shape in his heart. He would fight for Hannah's stability no matter the obstacles. Watching her blink away tears, he silently vowed never to fail her again. Before going to next, please subscribe, like, and share. Winter settled in deeper than ever, cloaking the city in a soft haze of gray that blurred the skyline outside Marcus's penthouse windows. In his living room, the heat hummed quietly, but Hannah still wore a thick sweater and curled her legs beneath her on the couch, almost as though cold came from within. She had just returned from another hospital visit with Marcus, where her grandmother was clinging to slow but steady improvements. Although the doctors now seemed guardedly optimistic, Hannah seldom let relief show. Instead, she retreated into her books, homework, and music, as if creating her own invisible barrier of focus. Late afternoon light cast long shadows across the glossy floor. Marcus stepped in from his study where he had finished a conference call with board members about a new acquisition. He caught Hannah in a moment of stillness, her gaze fixed on the empty corner of the room as though she were imagining something that wasn't there. Gently, he cleared his throat to announce his presence. She turned, offering the fragile half-smile that had become her trademark since moving in. "Hey," he said, sitting down in a nearby armchair. I talked to your grandmother's doctor today. She's doing better than they initially expected." Hannah nodded, pressing her lips together. "They said that earlier too," she replied softly, "and then they found something else that needed surgery." Marcus recognized the resignation in her voice. He inched closer, resting his elbows on his knees. "She's stronger now," he said, trying to convey genuine confidence. "And we'll both be there for her when she comes home." At that, Hannah's face fell just a touch, as if coming home was a fragile dream she could barely voice. To change the subject, Marcus gestured toward the upright piano. "Have you worked on anything new for your next talent show? The school usually hosts a spring performance, right?" She shrugged. "I'm not sure if I'll do it this year. Everything's weird." Then she tucked a lock of hair behind her ear. "But I still practice. Makes me feel better." With that admission, she rose, moved to the piano bench, and brushed her fingers across the keys. A gentle melody arose, understated but tinged with something that could have been hope or longing. Marcus listened in silence. Music, he realized, was Hannah's anchor in all this uncertainty. As her voice lifted in soft humming, he wondered whether his mother had once found the same solace in song when life felt overwhelming. Later, Vera appeared with a tray bearing 2 bowls of soup, and Hannah paused to eat. Marcus recognized how much she needed a stable routine, so he insisted they dine together, however informal the meal. With the table set simply, Just soup, warm bread, and a pitcher of water. They shared details about their day. She spoke about an upcoming science project, while he described a busy schedule of investor meetings. Although a subtle formality remained between them, there was also an emerging comfort, as if they were slowly learning each other's unspoken rhythms. He reminded her about a hospital visit planned for the weekend, and she nodded, eyes determined. "She wants me to bring her photo album," Hannah said, stirring her soup thoughtfully. "We found a few old pictures I hadn't seen before. One was, well, it was of me as a toddler. I guess it's the only copy that survived." Marcus paused, touched by the notion of how precious a single photograph could be. He had albums of his own mother, but many were torn or faded, leftovers from lean years. "I'd like to see it sometime," he said gently. Hannah offered a timid nod, as though uncertain whether that was allowed. "Maybe," she said softly. Then she slipped into silence, focusing on her food. Marcus let her be, sensing she needed space to sort through her shifting emotions. After dinner, they migrated back to the living room. The hush of the penthouse was periodically broken by the sound of traffic below or the soft chime of Marcus's phone. At one point, Hannah's school principal texted with a reminder about an upcoming parent-teacher conference. Marcus read the message twice, realizing how strange it felt to be included in such communication. The principal had adapted quickly, having seen how fully he'd stepped in. Though Hannah's grandmother was still the official guardian, the reality was that Marcus now filled day-to-day parental roles. "Parent-teacher conference is next Thursday," he mentioned casually. "I could go with you if you're comfortable with that." Hannah tucked her legs underneath her again, her posture shrinking a little. "I guess so. They'll just talk about my grades and how many classes I've missed this year." He approached the subject carefully. "You've done well keeping up with your schoolwork, especially given everything going on. Don't be hard on yourself." She didn't respond, but the corner of her mouth twitched in the hint of a grateful smile. Then she snapped her notebook shut and excused herself for a shower, leaving Marcus alone in the open-concept living room. The city's flickering skyline stretched out before him, and he rested his gaze on his reflection in the window, pondering how quickly he'd gone from wealthy recluse to makeshift caretaker. The following day, Marcus carved out 2 hours from his business schedule, deciding to pay a personal visit to Hannah's school. He wanted to confirm details for the parent-teacher conference, but more importantly, he hoped to gauge her environment and ensure no issues were arising now that she lived in a wealthier district. The principal, Mrs. Morales, greeted him in her office with a polite handshake. She was a calm-looking woman in her early 50s, dressed in a practical cardigan and sensible shoes. Files and colorful posters crammed every corner of the office, evidence of how many responsibilities she juggled. They exchanged small talk before she came to the point. "Hannah's had a tough time these past few years. Her grandmother's health issues often kept her from attending school events or maintaining consistent attendance, but her grades are actually decent. She's talented, especially musically." Marcus nodded, leaning forward. "That's good to hear. She's been through a lot. Is there anything specific I need to address before the conference next week?" Mrs. Morales studied him for a moment, as if trying to read his sincerity. "You being involved has helped her stability, but I'd recommend encouraging her to participate in the spring show. She has a gift. Performing might boost her confidence." Marcus listened intently, remembering the hush in the auditorium when Hannah's voice first soared. "I'll do what I can," he said. "I think she's hesitant because she feels unsettled." The principal's gaze softened. She'd benefit from seeing that some things can remain steady, even if her family situation is uncertain. Music could be an anchor for her. He left the school feeling more resolved than before, Encouraging Hannah to rejoin choir or audition for the talent showcase might be precisely what she needed to rediscover the part of herself that still glowed. Yet he knew any push had to be gentle. She would balk at being forced into anything. That weekend, the hospital visit included another round of consultations. Hannah's grandmother looked exhausted yet determined. The conversation turned serious when the attending physician mentioned the possibility of another operation in the coming month. Hannah tried to keep her composure, nodding and asking a few questions, but Marcus could tell from her stiff shoulders that she was terrified all over again. When they returned to the penthouse, she went straight to her room without touching the dinner Vera had prepared. He decided to give her space. Only later did he knock quietly on her door, half expecting her to ignore him. Instead, she called him in with a subdued, "Come in." She was perched on the bed, hugging a pillow, her eyes puffy. He sensed that her tears had been quiet but steady, welling up in moments of private despair. "Hey," he began softly, "I know that was a lot of information to take in, but you're not alone in this." She pressed her lips together. "I'm scared," she whispered, her words raw. "No matter what the doctors say, something else always goes wrong. Then she needs more procedures, more medication." Marcus crossed the room and crouched so they were on eye level. "I'm scared too," he admitted, voice tight, "but I'm here. Anything you need, whether it's money or rides to the hospital or just someone to talk to, you have it." A shiver ran through her frame as she nodded. He waited, allowing her the silence to gather whatever strength she had left. Then, in a voice calmer than before, she cleared her throat. "Mrs. Morales said something about a spring concert. She thinks I should sing again." He noticed how her gaze drifted to the worn sheet music stacked on her dresser. "Do you want to?" he asked gently. She exhaled. "I think so. If you think it's okay." His chest clenched with emotion he couldn't fully define, but he answered without hesitation, "I think it's a wonderful idea." They shared a small, tentative smile. For a moment, the bleakness of hospital corridors and uncertain test results receded. There was only this room, this bond forged in difficulty, and a fragile stirring of hope that perhaps, with enough courage, Hannah could allow her voice to echo through the world once more. Before going to next, please subscribe, like, and share. The following week brought biting winds and an overcast sky, as if the city were bracing itself for another wave of chill. Inside Marcus's penthouse, though, a tremor of excitement wove into the usual atmosphere of caution. After a hesitant yes from Hannah about the spring concert, Marcus contacted Mrs. Morales to confirm that Hannah would indeed audition. Her name was entered on a sign-up sheet, and the music instructor at the school seemed genuinely pleased to hear that she would be participating. Still, Hannah worried that her grandmother might not be there to watch her perform. Whenever Marcus noticed her expression turn pensive, he gently reminded her that even if her grandmother remained in the hospital, singing could be a promise of hope for both of them. When Hannah told him she needed a new piece to showcase her range, Marcus offered to accompany her to a music store. They picked out fresh sheet music, rifling through various genres before she settled on a gentle ballad that reminded her faintly of her grandmother's favorite lullabies. Standing amid shelves of scores and glistening instruments, Hannah almost felt like a normal kid, one whose biggest worry was choosing the right song. She allowed herself a momentary smile, an expression Marcus quietly treasured, though he never said it aloud. Instead, he carried her selections to the checkout counter, determined to feed her passion however he could. The day of the audition arrived sooner than expected. Marcus arranged to leave the office early, wanting to offer her a ride so she didn't have to lug her books and music binder on public transportation. She seemed composed on the outside, but her shallow breathing and frequent glances at her phone betrayed her nerves. He walked her to the music room, a plain space with fluorescent lighting and acoustic tiles. A small crowd of students, some chatting and others humming warm-up exercises, crowded near the door. Hannah lingered by the corridor, clasping her binder so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "You'll do fine," Marcus told her in a low voice. "Just pretend you're back at the piano in the penthouse." She nodded, exhaling. "Right. No big deal." He tried to offer a supportive smile, though his own heart pounded with a strange mix of pride and apprehension. While he didn't fear the corporate world, he faced countless executives without flinching. Watching Hannah step into an audition room felt more nerve-wracking than any board meeting he'd ever conducted. But the choice was hers, and he could only stand by and encourage. The audition itself was closed to observers, so he loitered in the hallway, checking his phone reflexively. It felt like an eternity before the door opened and a cluster of students shuffled out. Hannah emerged near the back, cheeks flushed. When their eyes met, she offered him the subtlest nod. He wanted to rush forward and ask how it went, but something about her posture made him hang back, letting her reach him on her own terms. "How do you feel?" he finally ventured. She shrugged, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "I think it was okay. The music teacher said something about stage presence. I guess we'll see." "That's great," Marcus replied, relieved that she seemed more confident than anxious. In the days that followed, Hannah fell into a pattern of diligent practice. Sometimes she worked quietly at the penthouse piano, methodically repeating sections of her ballad. Other times, she asked Marcus to sit in the living room, telling him she needed a small audience to conquer her jitters. Though he joked that he was hardly an expert, she insisted his mere presence helped. Once she even coaxed him into humming along to a tune, and though he laughed at himself, claiming his voice had all the charm of a strained violin, she thanked him for trying. Those shared moments replaced the heavy hush that had once ruled the penthouse. Meanwhile, hospital updates trickled in. Hannah's grandmother stabilized but required continued observation. Each time they visited, the older woman's eyes crinkled with gratitude when she saw how determined Hannah was to sing in the upcoming concert. She'd grip her granddaughter's hand and whisper encouragement between labored breaths. Marcus stood by, listening to their gentle exchanges, quietly offering reassurance about medical bills and care arrangements. He sometimes wondered if he should initiate formal guardianship proceedings, but something about the grandmother's resilience made him pause. She might still pull through and reclaim her role, and Marcus respected that possibility. He would not overstep unless it became absolutely necessary. A week before the concert roster was set, Hannah received a letter in homeroom. She had been selected as one of the lead vocalists for the show. Her teacher claimed her audition displayed impressive control and expression, and they wanted her to open the evening's lineup. Thrilled and terrified in equal measure, Hannah rushed to text Marcus the news. At his next meeting, he caught himself grinning at his phone like a teenager, ignoring the curious stares of associates around the conference table. As her big day neared, Hannah's practice intensified. She spent every spare minute refining the nuances of her piece, ensuring each crescendo and pause conveyed the right emotion. One particularly windy evening, Marcus found her hunched at the piano, eyes glistening with concentration. She struck a chord that wavered slightly, frustration furrowing her brow. He approached quietly, noticing tear tracks on her cheeks. "What's wrong?" he asked gently, lowering himself to the bench beside her. She cleared her throat, voice trembling. "Everything's so uncertain. My grandmother's still in the hospital, and sometimes I'm scared I'll freeze on stage. Or worse, what if I do well and she's not there to hear it?" Marcus let out a slow breath. "You sing for both of you," he said softly. "The music will reach her heart no matter where she is." She gave a shaky nod, returning her gaze to the piano keys. "Could you Sit with me while I run through it again." "Of course," he replied, shifting to give her space on the bench. As she began, her voice emerged unsteady, then rose with quiet determination. Each verse carried a subtle yearning, as though she poured every worry, every flicker of hope into the melody. Marcus listened, eyes stinging with his own surge of emotion. He thought of how his mother would have treasured such a chance, to guide a young singer, to hear her own favorite lullabies reborn in new voices. By the final chord, Hannah's breathing was labored, but her face glowed like she had found a piece of herself she feared was lost. "You're ready," he said, swallowing a lump in his throat. "Really ready." She pressed a hand against her chest. "It's a lot," she whispered. He offered a reassuring squeeze on her shoulder. "You'll be brilliant." The evening of the performance arrived, bringing a swirl of tension that overshadowed everything else. The auditorium was far larger and grander than the middle school stage where Marcus had first heard Hannah sing. High ceilings, polished seats, and acoustics designed to showcase nuance gave the place an undeniable gravitas. Students hurried backstage, adjusting costumes and double-checking microphones. Teachers and volunteers bustled about with clipboards, issuing whispered reminders about timings and stage cues. Marcus, seated in the front row, couldn't help recalling that first night, the way Hannah's trembling voice had caught him off guard, flooding him with memories of his own mother's beloved song. Tonight, his heart thumped with anticipation, protective instincts surging. He spotted other parents clutching cameras or flowers, waiting to record their children's shining moment. Marcus had no flowers, but in his jacket pocket, he held a small trinket, a silver pendant engraved with a single musical note. He planned to give it to Hannah afterward, a symbol of how proud he felt, no matter the outcome. The lights dimmed, and the hush of expectation fell over the crowd. A spotlight centered on the stage, where the music teacher took the microphone to introduce the show. One by one, young performers came forward. Some sang pop covers, others danced. Applause rang out politely. Marcus watched, unseeing, his pulse quickening with each act that brought Hannah's turn closer. Finally, the teacher announced her name. A hush followed, thick with curiosity. Marcus tensed. She stepped into the spotlight, wearing a simple dress and clutching the microphone with both hands. The piano intro began, though not from her usual upright, an accompanist in the corner. She inhaled, and for a heartbeat, Marcus thought he saw her eyes flick toward the empty seat where her grandmother might have been. Then her gaze swept across the crowd, landing briefly on him. A quiet conviction settled over her face. When she sang, it was as though all the uncertainties and heartbreak fused into something luminous. Each note was precise, yet emotional. Each breath an act of perseverance against the swirl of fear and longing. The auditorium held its collective breath, captured by the gentle vibrato in her voice. Marcus felt tears prick at his eyes. He realized she had discovered that rare power of music to transform sorrow into beauty. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel sheer awe. Not at a business venture, not at a financial coup, but at a child finding her voice in a world that had often felt too cruel. As the final line echoed, the entire room erupted in applause. The spotlight caught a single tear rolling down Hannah's cheek. Though she quickly dabbed it away, Marcus couldn't miss the grateful, determined spark shining in her eyes. She bowed, blinking at the standing ovation, then disappeared behind the curtain. Marcus realized he was on his feet too, clapping harder than he ever had in his life. Before going to next, please subscribe, like, and share. The moment Hannah slipped behind the curtain, her legs nearly buckled under the force of her own relief. Her cheeks were hot and her pulse drummed in her ears, yet she felt an inexplicable glow fluttering in her chest. She clutched the microphone, half convinced that she had only imagined the crowd rising to its feet. She blinked, adjusting to the backstage dimness where other performers hurried past in a chaotic swirl of excitement. Her music teacher caught her in a brief embrace, murmuring congratulations that Hannah barely registered. All she could think was that she had taken the stage, delivered her song with heart, and somehow found courage in the echo of applause. She emerged into the corridor leading away from the stage, still dazed, when Marcus appeared around the corner. He was walking quickly, face alight with a mixture of pride and amazement. Despite his usual composure, he seemed almost boyish in his excitement, stepping around scattered props and wires until he reached her side. He opened his mouth, but no immediate words formed, so he offered a breathless laugh. Then he carefully placed a silver pendant in her hand, a delicate chain with a single musical note engraved on a tiny disc. "For you," he managed, swallowing hard. "A little reminder that your voice matters." Hannah stared at the pendant, her mind whirling. She almost couldn't believe that this impeccably dressed man, this powerful CEO who had once been a total stranger, was celebrating her performance like a proud family member might. Tears threatened to well in her eyes, but she forced them back, offering him the smallest of smiles. "Thank you," she said, her voice still trembling with adrenaline. I really appreciate it." "Your grandmother will be so proud when she hears," Marcus added, keeping his voice gentle. "We'll make sure she sees her recording. That was incredible, Hannah." She felt warmth spread through her chest, a sensation close to joy. For the first time in months, perhaps since her grandmother's health had truly started declining, she experienced a flicker of hope. She pressed the pendant to her heart, then tucked it carefully into her pocket, nervous about losing something that felt immediately precious. Marcus guided her away from the busy backstage area, heading toward the front lobby where parents and guests milled about, congratulating performers or snapping pictures. Some of Hannah's classmates waved in recognition, though Hannah was too overwhelmed to do more than wave back shyly. They slipped out into the chilly night air where the glow of streetlights reflected on damp sidewalks. Marcus waited until they were safely in his car before he spoke again, adjusting the rearview mirror with a hand that still seemed a bit unsteady from emotion. "Do you feel okay?" he asked gently. "Your hands are shaking." Hannah looked down at her fingers, realizing that she was, in fact, trembling. "I'm all right," she said softly. I guess I never expected that kind of response. I thought a handful of people would clap politely, but that standing ovation. You earned every bit of it," Marcus cut in. "And I suspect you're going to earn more as you keep going." A shy laugh escaped her. "I don't know. It felt good, though. Singing. It makes things seem less scary." He pulled the car away from the curb, merging into slow-moving traffic. "I'm glad," he said, flicking on the heater when he noticed Hannah rubbing her arms for warmth. "Do you want to celebrate with something simple like hot chocolate or dinner out? Or if you'd rather just go home, that's fine too." Hannah thought for a moment. She was exhausted but oddly elated, as if a burst of energy had flooded her veins. "Could we get hot chocolate?" she asked tentatively, "and maybe see if the hospital would let us drop by quickly, even if it's late?" Marcus nodded. "Absolutely," he said. "Let's do that." They drove to a small cafe known for its decadent hot cocoa, steam fogging the windows as they sipped from paper cups. Hannah savored the sweetness, the warmth reminding her of winter nights she used to spend curled up on the couch with her grandmother, back when things were simpler. After finishing, they went straight to the hospital, Hannah clutching the program from the concert with trembling excitement. She knew visiting hours were nearly over, but Marcus used his influence and gentle insistence to gain them a few minutes. Her grandmother lay propped up by pillows, an oxygen tube threaded under her nose. At the soft click of the door, her eyes fluttered open. Hannah walked up to the bed, carefully placing the concert program on the tray table. She explained in a breathless rush how the audience applauded, how her teacher said she had grown so much since the last time she sang. Tears shimmered in the older woman's eyes, and she reached out a frail hand to grasp her granddaughter's. "I knew you could do it," she whispered, her voice wavering. "I'm so proud." Marcus stood near the door, allowing them privacy, but overhearing every word. The grandmother cast him a grateful glance. "Thank you," she managed, voice thick with emotion. "You've given her a chance, and I couldn't be there, but it means the world that you were." He merely shook his head, unwilling to take credit. "She's the brave one," he said. "I'm just lucky to witness it." Before they left, Hannah carefully set the silver pendant on the bed for a moment, letting her grandmother see the musical note engraved on it. The older woman smiled, eyes misty, and insisted Hannah keep it close. "That's your sign," she murmured. "You have a gift that can shine, no matter where you are." They departed when a nurse politely reminded them of the late hour. The drive back felt quieter but not bleak. Hannah's eyes drooped with fatigue, yet a serene contentment enveloped her. Once they were in the penthouse, Marcus insisted she head straight to bed. He watched her vanish down the hallway, the pendant chain shimmering in the faint overhead light. Standing there in the echoing silence that followed, he closed his eyes and let out a long breath. He felt an unfamiliar ache in his chest, an ache that came not from sorrow but from the intensity of caring about someone else's future. For so many years, he had justified his solitude as the price for success. Now he wondered if he had been missing something fundamental all along. Days turned into a quiet routine again, though this time the air seemed lighter. A few of Hannah's classmates texted her about how beautiful her voice sounded, and the music teacher invited her to join an after-school choir practice whenever her schedule allowed. The hospital calls continued, but each new report hinted at incremental progress. It was slow, but a glimmer of relief brightened Hannah's eyes each time she realized her grandmother was stable for another day. Marcus often caught her playing with the pendant chain when she read or watched television, as though drawing reassurance from its simple charm. One afternoon, he returned from a lengthy board meeting to find Hannah seated at the kitchen island with homework spread around her. She offered him a small wave, then asked, "Marcus, do you have any pictures of your mom? I remember you mentioning she sang too." He paused, momentarily caught off guard. Then he nodded. "Yes, I do," he said, voice softer than usual. "I keep them in an album in my study. Would you like to see them?" She set her pencil down. "If that's okay." They ventured into his study, a room lined with shelves of books about finance, leadership, and the occasional volume of poetry. Marcus slid open a drawer in a mahogany cabinet and retrieved a weathered photo album. They settled on a small sofa, flipping through pictures of a smiling woman with warm eyes. In one photo, she stood on a makeshift stage, microphone in hand, wearing an outdated dress that sparkled under cheap stage lights. The photo's edges were yellowed, a testament to years of handling. "She looks happy," Hannah said, running a finger over the protective plastic sheet covering the snapshot. Marcus nodded. "She was. Even when we had next to nothing, she found joy in singing. She said music couldn't solve all your problems, but it could sure make them easier to bear for a while." Hannah glanced up. "You miss her a lot, don't you?" His throat tightened. "Every day," he admitted. All this, he gestured vaguely at the penthouse around them, would have been so different if she'd been here to see it. A wistful silence settled between them, a shared understanding of how life could be cruel and wondrous all at once. Then Hannah drew in a breath, finding courage she didn't know she had. "She'd be proud of you," she said earnestly. "And thank you for everything you've done for me." Emotion welled in Marcus's chest, but he masked it with a tight smile. "I think she'd be proud of us both," he said softly. They closed the album and let the stillness speak for them, bridging their separate pasts with the thread of compassion that now connected them. Before going to next, please subscribe, like, and share. Despite the quiet routine that had settled in since Hannah's concert, a subtle tension simmered beneath the surface. Each day, Marcus juggled urgent business obligations and made sure to accompany Hannah for her occasional check-ins at the hospital. Her grandmother's progress was promising, but the doctors remained vigilant. Meanwhile, Hannah found herself swaying between cautious optimism and crippling worry. She clung to her music more than ever, practicing whenever she felt fear creeping in. Marcus, for his part, tried to stay composed, though he often woke before dawn, mind churning with worries about finances, guardianship rights, and Hannah's emotional well-being. Late one afternoon, a phone call disrupted the fragile calm. A social worker named Ms. Porter requested an appointment to assess Hannah's living situation. Marcus could almost hear the subtext. She wanted proof that Hannah was thriving, not simply existing in a luxurious penthouse. While he understood the necessity, apprehension threaded through him. If the authorities decided her grandmother's condition prevented any real oversight, they might insist on alternative arrangements. Marcus felt unprepared for a legal battle, but he refused to see Hannah uprooted again. He agreed to meet Ms. Porter at his home the next day. A dread lingered. That evening, Hannah noticed Marcus's drawn expression and asked if something was wrong. He debated whether to burden her with details about the upcoming visit, but decided honesty would serve them both better. When he explained Ms. Porter's purpose, Hannah stiffened. She had encountered social workers in the past, usually during moments of crisis that preceded yet another move between distant relatives or foster arrangements. Marcus sensed her fear when she asked if Ms. Porter might force her to leave. His reassuring answer came swiftly. Whatever happened, he promised, he would always fight to ensure she remained safe and stable. The next day, Ms. Porter arrived precisely at noon, stepping into the penthouse with professional composure. She wore a tailored suit, carried a tablet, and greeted Hannah with a warm smile. Marcus, feeling uncharacteristically nervous, led them to the living room. Soft winter sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, revealing no trace of chaos or neglect. Still, Ms. Porter examined every detail. She asked Hannah how her studies were going, how she spent her free time, and if she felt supported. Hannah answered politely, her voice subdued. Meanwhile, Marcus hovered, attempting to gauge whether Ms. Porter's inquisitive gaze was reassuring. Eventually, Ms. Porter requested a private chat with Hannah, guiding her to a quieter corner of the room. Marcus watched them go, swallowing apprehension. He knew social workers often asked probing questions about emotional safety, about discipline. He took a seat, forcibly reminding himself that he had nothing to hide. Soon, Ms. Porter returned, her expression neutral, and suggested they discuss the broader circumstances: Hannah's grandmother's health, the financial arrangements, and any plans for permanent guardianship. Marcus explained how he had covered medical bills, ensured Hannah's schooling, and stayed in close contact with the hospital. Ms. Porter listened, scribbling notes intently. "I appreciate your openness," Ms. Porter said once Marcus finished. "Given Hannah's grandmother remains hospitalized, the court might question who holds legal authority over her well-being. We'll need to make an interim plan until her grandmother recovers, or if, in the worst case, she can't resume guardianship." Marcus's chest tightened at the prospect. He glanced at Hannah, who stood nearby, trying to appear calm. Before Ms. Porter left, she reassured them that no drastic decisions were immediate. Her report, however, would influence the next steps. Watching the social worker step into the elevator, Marcus felt the beginnings of an impending storm. Later that day, a subdued Hannah retreated to the piano, quietly practicing scales. Marcus hovered in the hall, wrestling with the idea of formally seeking guardianship. He knew it wouldn't be simple. Lawyers would want documentation. The hospital might request statements. and Hannah's grandmother could view it as a betrayal if she hoped to recover soon. With each note Hannah struck, Marcus's resolve grew. If the grandmother couldn't resume custody, he wouldn't allow the girl to fall back into the system. That certainty flared in him like a vow, urging him to protect Hannah from any more upheaval or heartbreak. That night, after Hannah went to bed, Marcus poured himself a cup of coffee and settled in his study. He dialed his legal counsel, explaining the situation in measured tones. The lawyer outlined potential avenues: temporary guardianship, medical proxy forms, even the possibility of adoption if matters became truly dire. Each option came with legal hurdles, but nothing seemed insurmountable, especially with Marcus's resources. Still, the moral weight pressed on him. This wasn't a merger or acquisition. It was a child's life. By the time he hung up, his coffee had gone cold, and a profound weariness stole over him slowly. In the coming days, a flurry of phone calls and paperwork blurred together. Hannah, unaware of every nuance, sensed enough to ask if Marcus planned to become her legal guardian. Each time he told her they would figure things out together, depending on her grandmother's progress. Meanwhile, Ms. Porter submitted her initial report, praising the stable environment but noting that a final decision hinged on the grandmother's prognosis. When Hannah visited the hospital, her grandmother smiled encouragingly, insisting she felt stronger. But uncertainty lingered in her gaze, and Hannah left each visit clinging to Marcus's promise of unwavering support always. One crisp afternoon, Hannah found Marcus in the kitchen, hunched over a stack of documents. His tie was askew and circles shadowed his eyes. She hovered at the threshold, fingering the silver pendant around her neck, uncertain whether to speak. After a moment she approached, noticing terms like custody hearing and permanent placement on the pages. Wordlessly, she set a glass of water beside him. He glanced up, gratitude flickering across his features. She mustered her courage, whispering that if her grandmother couldn't come home, she wanted to stay here. Marcus's throat constricted, and he nodded, voice trembling with emotion. The doorbell rang. Startled, Marcus rose, smoothing his rumpled shirt before crossing to the foyer. A courier handed him an envelope. Back in the kitchen, Hannah watched as he opened it, revealing official papers from Ms. Porter's office. The documents outlined a provisional custody evaluation, scheduling a court session to determine the next steps if her grandmother remained incapacitated. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, though he forced his voice into calm reassurance. Hannah, reading the first lines over his shoulder, set the glass of water down before it could slip from her trembling fingers. The future loomed, uncertain yet unavoidable. Marcus clenched the paperwork, mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Hannah's grandmother might recover enough to regain custody, or the court might grant Marcus full guardianship. Either way, an official decision loomed. He placed a hand on Hannah's shoulder, feeling the tension thrumming through her. She inhaled, blinking hard against tears. He realized how desperately she feared another upheaval. In that instant, he recalled the vow he'd made to himself on the day he'd first heard her sing, to protect her from a life of endless uncertainty. He exhaled a slow breath, whispering that everything would be okay, somehow, some way. That night, the penthouse was steeped in an anxious hush. Neither Hannah nor Marcus spoke much during dinner, their thoughts consumed by pending legalities and hospital updates. Before bed, Hannah lingered at the piano, striking chords that wavered with each uncertain note. Marcus stood in the doorway, arms folded, grappling with a swirl of emotion. He didn't want to fail her or his mother's memory. Approaching the bench, he placed a steadying hand over hers on the keys. She glanced up, eyes glassy, and he murmured that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. Outside, winter winds howled unheeded softly. Before going to next, please subscribe, like, and share. Marcus had weathered hostile takeovers and stood unflinching before skeptical shareholders. But this court proceeding felt different, more personal. The day arrived in a swirl of nervous energy. Gray clouds laced the sky as he and Hannah climbed the courthouse steps, flanked by Ms. Porter and a discreet lawyer from Marcus's firm. Hannah clutched her notebook, a subconscious shield perhaps, and stared at the austere columns that framed the entrance. She swallowed hard, glancing at Marcus for reassurance. He squeezed her shoulder gently, guiding her inside to a security checkpoint buzzing with other families and officials. The echo of footsteps and hushed voices amplified her anxiety. Inside the courtroom, fluorescent lights cast stark illumination on polished wooden benches. Hannah had never been in a place like this. Normally, courtrooms were reserved for matters of law that felt distant and intimidating. But now her entire life hinged on what a judge would decide. Marcus led her to a seat near the front, quietly pointing out that they were meeting only to establish her status during her grandmother's hospital stay. She nodded, though her face betrayed the fear she carried. Ms. Porter approached them, offering a thin smile meant to be comforting. Marcus tapped his foot in a restless rhythm, eyes scanning the faces of others waiting for their turn, a swirl of parents, children, social workers. Each individual had their own story of upheaval. When their case was called, they rose. Hannah's heart pounded as they stepped forward. The judge, an older man with reading glasses perched on his nose, peered at the assembled documents. He asked a series of questions about Hannah's current living arrangement, about her grandmother's prognosis, and about Marcus's readiness to continue providing care. Marcus's lawyer answered succinctly, emphasizing that Hannah was stable in his home and that her grandmother's condition remained uncertain. Ms. Porter added that Hannah was thriving academically and socially, showing marked improvement since moving in with Marcus. The judge took notes, his expression non-committal. Hannah listened, mind spinning. She wished her grandmother could be here to give her blessing, to confirm that she wanted Hannah safe with Marcus if she couldn't recover soon. But the hospital bed still held her, and no video call could replicate a physical presence in court. The judge asked if Hannah wished to speak. Hesitant, she glanced at Marcus. He gave a small nod, so she took a step closer, her voice almost a whisper, as she explained how stable she felt with Marcus, how he'd helped her with school, and stayed at her side through her grandmother's surgeries. At one point, her voice cracked, betraying the hidden terror she felt at possibly losing this fragile new semblance of security. The judge watched her intently, listening without interruption. At last, the judge cleared his throat. "Under these circumstances," he said, adjusting his glasses, "I'm inclined to grant Mr. Sullivan temporary guardianship, revisitable pending the grandmother's recovery. However, we will need updates from her medical team and ongoing visits from Ms. Porter to ensure everything remains in Hannah's best interest." A small tremor of relief swept through Hannah, her eyes brimming. She clutched her notebook, pressing it against her chest as the judge's gavel knocked once, finalizing the decision. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Though it wasn't permanent, it was enough. For now, the fear of sudden displacement had lessened. They stepped out of the courtroom, weaving through throngs of anxious people. Marcus's lawyer quietly shook his hand, promising to handle any additional paperwork. Outside, the air was cold and crisp, but the clouds had parted slightly to reveal a hint of pale sun. Marcus glanced at Hannah, who lingered on the courthouse steps, face turned upward toward the sky. She blinked away tears that weren't entirely sorrowful. Approaching her, he lightly placed an arm around her shoulders, steering her toward the car waiting at the curb. The ride back was subdued. Hannah stared out the window, fiddling with the pendant around her neck. Periodically, Marcus checked on her, but she offered only murmured replies, too lost in her own swirl of relief and uncertainty. They stopped at the hospital before returning to the penthouse, eager to share the news with her grandmother. Though visiting hours hovered near their end, a sympathetic nurse let them through, recognizing Hannah's anxious face. Her grandmother lay propped against pillows, skin still pale but eyes more alert than the week prior. When they explained the court's decision, she nodded, voice thick with gratitude. She clasped Marcus's hand, whispering thanks for taking care of her granddaughter while Hannah stood nearby, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. Beneath the fluorescent lights, their small circle of relief felt almost sacred. Over the next few days, a new normal took shape. Marcus's lawyer worked out the finer details of the temporary guardianship order, ensuring Hannah had all necessary documentation for school and health care. Ms. Porter dropped by unannounced once or twice, discreetly checking the penthouse. Each time she seemed satisfied with Hannah's progress, although the burden of official oversight remained like a shadow at the edge of their lives. Hannah resumed her daily routines, choir practice, homework sessions, visits to the hospital. Yet the weight on her shoulders lightened, knowing Marcus was recognized by the law as her temporary guardian. She no longer had to fear abrupt removal by authorities, nor wonder whether Marcus had the standing to keep her safe. Meanwhile, her grandmother made slow but tangible progress. Every new test signaled a step closer to leaving the hospital, though the final prognosis remained guarded. One evening, after an especially positive report, Hannah surprised Marcus by greeting him with an actual hug when he walked through the penthouse door. Caught off guard, he froze momentarily before returning the embrace. The act was quick, more like a fleeting gesture of relief, but it spoke volumes. He asked about her day. She told him that the music teacher had invited her to sing at a district showcase next month. A small flush of excitement lit her cheeks as she explained how it was by audition only, and her teacher believed she'd sail through. "You should go for it," he said, smiling. "You know I'll support you." She grinned, the tension of the past weeks momentarily receding. "I think I will," she replied. "It's nice to plan for something, instead of always worrying if I can." He nodded, understanding how vital it was for her to picture a future, even as her grandmother's situation remained in flux. That evening, the piano filled the living space with a hopeful tune. Marcus noticed how Hannah held herself straighter, sang with clearer confidence, as if the court decision had validated more than just her living arrangement. It validated her worth in a world that had often overlooked her. Though life seemed brighter, challenges still stirred. A swirl of complicated emotions welled up whenever Marcus thought about the grandmother's eventual discharge. Would she be well enough to reclaim Hannah's care? If so, what role would Marcus play afterward? He wrestled with the dread of letting her go back to a precarious life, no matter how much love the grandmother offered, but none of these questions had immediate answers. For now, he focused on the present, ensuring Hannah received the emotional and financial support she deserved. One midweek evening, Hannah approached Marcus with a request. She wanted to record a small video message for her grandmother, showcasing the progress of her singing. "She always asks me what I've been practicing," Hannah said, eyes brimming with earnestness. "I'd like to show her, but visiting hours sometimes don't allow enough time." They set up a simple recording on Marcus's phone, the penthouse lights casting a warm glow over the piano. Hannah wore a casual sweater, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail. Nervousness tinted her cheeks pink, but the moment she launched into the melody, a sense of calm enveloped her. Marcus stood behind the phone, holding it steady, amazed at how she could channel her deepest emotions so gracefully through music. When she finished, a hush filled the living room. He pressed stop and handed her the phone. They watched the playback, and she smiled, satisfied. The next day, they delivered the video to her grandmother on a small tablet. She watched with shining eyes, clasping Hannah's hand and whispering that she'd be home soon, that she couldn't wait to hear those songs in person. Hannah smiled, though Marcus didn't miss the flicker of uncertainty beneath her gaze. He knew she wanted nothing more than to see her grandmother strong again, yet the possibility that their lives could pivot again hung in the balance. After leaving the hospital, the two of them walked in silence to the car. Snow flurries had begun, swirling lightly in the evening air. When they reached the penthouse, Hannah paused by the window, staring down at the city's traffic and streetlights glowing through the snowfall. She turned to Marcus, her voice quiet. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." He stepped closer, searching her eyes, seeing gratitude and caution entwined. "You never have to thank me, Hannah," he said, measuring each word. "You belong here as long as you need." A flicker of relief passed across her face. She retreated to her room soon afterward, likely overwhelmed by the day's emotional weight. Marcus lingered by the piano, his thoughts circling the unknown future. Yet for now he found comfort in the knowledge that Hannah felt safe enough to call this place home, even temporarily. As the snow drifted against the glass, he placed one hand on the piano keys, recalling the songs he'd heard her play. A child's resilience was a remarkable thing, he realized, stronger than most corporate titans he'd negotiated with. And he intended to safeguard that resilience no matter what tomorrow asked of him. Before going to next, please subscribe, like, and share. Hannah woke early the next morning, stirred by a slight rustling at the penthouse's entrance. At first, she lay in bed, blinking in the half-light, wondering if she had dreamt the sound. But it persisted, a muted tapping that urged her to slip on her robe and venture into the hallway. As she tiptoed past the living room, she found Marcus, already dressed, speaking in a hushed tone on the phone. He caught sight of her and gave a small nod, prompting her to wait. The conversation ended shortly, and he turned, his expression solemn. "That was the hospital," he said softly. "They think your grandmother's ready to be discharged next week. They've scheduled a final round of evaluations, but they're optimistic." For several seconds, Hannah could only stare at him, a mixture of relief and fear rippling across her features. She sank into the nearest chair, pressing her fingertips to her temples, as if trying to anchor herself. "So she could come home," she whispered. "And I'll go back to live with her?" Marcus crouched beside her, resting a hand lightly on her arm. "We don't have to decide anything this moment. Her doctors want her to recover at a slower pace, maybe with home care. We'll see what she wants, what's safest for both of you." Despite his reassuring tone, an undercurrent of anxiety flickered in his gaze. They spent the next few days in a cloud of mixed emotions. Hannah hovered between excitement, craving her grandmother's presence, and dread, fearing that if she left Marcus's care, she might lose her newfound sense of stability. Marcus, meanwhile, tried to conceal his own turmoil. Legally, he still held temporary guardianship, but if her grandmother insisted on resuming full custody, the court might recognize that right immediately, or at least establish a transition plan. He had grown so used to Hannah's presence in his penthouse, her music, her hopeful smile, that the thought of her abrupt departure felt like a quiet heartbreak he hadn't anticipated. By midweek, the hospital confirmed an official discharge date. Hannah's grandmother would move to a small rehabilitation apartment near the medical center, where she could receive monitored care for a few more weeks. On hearing the news, Hannah's hands turned clammy, her breath catching. At first, she said nothing, simply nodding when Marcus told her. But that evening, as they cleared dinner dishes, she finally confided what gnawed at her. "I love my grandmother," she murmured, setting down a plate. "She raised me, I owe her everything, but it's been so calm here, and I'm scared that once she's out, we'll struggle again like before." She twisted her fingers nervously. "I don't want to lose you either." Marcus took a steadying breath. "No matter what arrangement we come up with, "You're not losing me," he said. "I won't vanish. I can help from a distance, or maybe your grandmother will be open to a shared plan until she's fully strong." Hannah blinked, uncertain. "You mean like me staying here sometimes, and sometimes with her?" The notion sounded too generous to be real. "It's possible," he assured her. "I care about both of you. There's no reason we can't work out something that lets her recover without overexerting herself." Though uncertainty lingered, a tiny semblance of hope crept into Hannah's eyes. She continued scrubbing the dishes, her mind whirling with what-ifs. Marcus watched her, wanting to take away every doubt. Yet he knew they were venturing into delicate territory, and the final say rested with her grandmother. On the day of discharge, Hannah insisted on accompanying Marcus to pick her grandmother up from the hospital. The elevator ride up to her room felt surreal. Blank corridors, nurses bustling, an antiseptic smell they'd come to recognize. Hannah's grandmother was seated on the edge of the bed, dressed in a simple blouse and pants, looking frailer, but undeniably brighter. She glanced up as they entered, relief shining in her eyes. "It's about time," she said, voice trembling with emotion. "I feel like I've been cooped up here an eternity." Hannah rushed forward, hugging her carefully. The nurse went over final instructions, prescriptions, dietary guidelines, a schedule of follow-up appointments. Marcus discreetly signed some forms, ensuring all financial obligations remained covered. Then, with methodical care, they escorted her grandmother into a waiting wheelchair and down to the curb, where a transport van waited to bring her to the rehabilitation apartment. Hannah climbed in beside her, hand clasped around her grandmother's. Marcus followed in his own car, not wanting to intrude on their moment of reunion but staying near enough to help. The apartment was modest, a small living area, a kitchen with basic appliances, and a bedroom outfitted with medical equipment. Therapists would visit regularly to track her progress. After the staff helped settle her grandmother in, Hannah surveyed the space with a hint of unease. She remembered cramped apartments and overdue rent. But this environment was less about poverty and more about caution, every corner adapted for a convalescent. Her grandmother sank onto the bed, exhaustion etched into her features. She waved Marcus over, beckoning for Hannah as well. "You've done more for us than I can ever repay," she told Marcus, voice frail but resolute. "You took care of Hannah when I couldn't. But I'm getting stronger step by step. I want to see my granddaughter every day." Her eyes flicked to Hannah, who lingered near the window, looking torn. "We may not have wealth, but we have each other." Marcus nodded, tension gathering in his chest. "Of course," he said. "I completely understand. I just don't want you to feel rushed into full-time care. Hannah is worried about overburdening you, and so am I." For a moment, a flicker of pride crossed the older woman's face, but it softened quickly. "I know my limits," she admitted, "and the doctors are clear that I need at least a month of monitored therapy before I can handle much on my own. So we need to figure something out." They talked through possible arrangements. The idea of Hannah splitting time surfaced, allowing her grandmother to focus on her own recovery without the stress of daily care for a teenager. Hannah stood silently, heart pounding, uncertain how her grandmother would react. But to her surprise, the older woman sighed and nodded. "I never wanted to hold you back," she told Hannah. "If staying with Marcus some nights helps you keep steady, so be it. Just promise to visit me whenever you can." Hannah blinked, relief mixing with guilt. She approached and hugged her grandmother gently, tears threatening to spill. Marcus stood behind them, exhaling slowly. He offered to provide anything needed: transport, groceries, additional home care, earning a grateful, if weary, smile in return. Although no permanent decision was etched in stone, a fragile peace formed. They would take it week by week, letting her grandmother rebuild her strength while Hannah retained the safety net of Marcus's guardianship. Over the following days, the new arrangement took shape. Hannah spent some evenings at the rehabilitation apartment, reading to her grandmother, helping with small tasks, and playing soft background music to soothe her. On school nights, she often returned to the penthouse so she could keep up with her extracurriculars and rest more easily. Marcus shuttled her between locations without complaint, fine-tuning his own busy schedule around hospital appointments and Hannah's choir practices. Each time he dropped her off, she noticed the weight in his gaze, the silent promise that he would always pick her up again. Eventually, Ms. Porter came by to confirm that everything was running smoothly. She chatted with Hannah's grandmother, who expressed gratitude for the arrangement, acknowledging that without Marcus's intervention, they might have lost the thread of stability altogether. Hannah hovered nearby, fiddling with the silver pendant, hearing how Ms. Porter seemed genuinely pleased. The social worker commended the teamwork she witnessed. Though final legal statuses might shift if her grandmother fully recovered, the environment felt supportive, and for now, that sufficed. One afternoon, Hannah arrived back at the penthouse from a visit with her grandmother. Marcus greeted her at the door, a warm smile brightening his tired eyes. He mentioned dinner, but she hesitated, then softly asked if she could sing first. He nodded, understanding without question. She went straight to the piano and opened the same ballad she had performed at the spring concert. The moment she touched the keys, that familiar feeling of solace enveloped her. Marcus stood by the window, hands in his pockets, letting her voice wash over him. No tension or looming court dates marred this moment. No frantic hospital calls overshadowed their evening. In that gentle interplay of notes, all their challenges, triumphs, and anxieties converged into something coherent and fragile, yet so achingly beautiful. As the final chord faded, Hannah turned on the bench, meeting Marcus's gaze. Emotion gathered behind her eyes. She murmured thanks not just for the roof above her head or the steady meals, but for the sense of belonging he had given her. He stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder, and simply said, "Always." Through that single word, she felt his unspoken vow, the one that transcended any legal paperwork or fleeting circumstance. He had seen her on that first night, singing his mother's favorite song. Now they walked a shared path of hope, forging a bond that neither of them had foreseen. And though the future remained a delicate tapestry of shifting threads, the two of them had found a family of their own making, intertwined by music and compassion and the promise that together they could face whatever came next.